So this is Aaron, who's going to come and do a talk with us about his career, his sort of journey into physics and what he does at the moment. He'll be able to go through all of this. I've seen some of the slides and they look fantastic. Really, it's going to be really interesting. I think it's going to be really useful and really insightful. I'll just quickly say, for those of you that aren't on e-mentoring already, at the Mullany Fund, we run an online mentoring service. So Aaron's one of our mentors. We have mentors from across the UK and further afield, all across STEM subjects. So we run three sessions throughout the year. So if you're interested in having a one-to-one mentor alongside talks like these, you can come join us on the website that I linked in the email I sent you. So yeah, check out our website and have a look at all the other projects we do. So yeah, Aaron works at CERN and at Bristol, and he's going to give you much more detail about what he does right now. So I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks a lot for inviting me to give this talk. Hopefully it'll be interesting and useful. So I'm going to be focusing on high energy physics, as that's where I've ended up in my career. So just give an overview of what I'll be talking about. So I'll give a reasonable introduction, some personal history just to give some context of how I grew up, how I ended up getting into physics, what motivated me to get into physics, then some details on my physics career so far, so different stages, university degree, PhD and postdoc. Then I'll go into more details on what I actually work on. So this will be particle physics and the standard model, which is currently our best theoretical model, which explains very accurately what we see in nature at the particle level. Then some details on high energy physics at the LHC, some details on high energy physics outside of the LHC, and some other interesting experiments that are currently running or being built to study physics beyond the standard model, to explain things that we don't understand of things that we observe in nature. And then it's just some experiences and advice, basically. And there's a picture of a t-shirt on the right hand side here, which there's some photos of people wearing these in the control room, which is quite funny. So who am I? So my name's Aaron Bundock. I'm 37. I live in Geneva at the moment. I moved back out here in November, but I've lived out here on and off for around 7 years. And I'm a senior postdoc at University of Bristol. I should have added here that I'm part of the CMS collaboration at CERN. This is one of the general purpose detectors at the LHC. I grew up and went to school in Gloucester. So spent my youth hanging around the cathedral, going to gigs at the Guildhall, trying to get into various pubs, and camping in the Forest of Dean. There's some pictures of those various things there. Music's always been important to me. I play the keyboards and piano and make music and DJ different types of electronic music, and love going to gigs and festivals, and also mountain biking and being in nature when I can. So in terms of motivation, there's always this one time that I have stuck in my head when I think about what made me get into physics. And this was in a physics lesson when I was 15 or 16. And my physics teacher was going through the quarks, and I was like, what is going on here, right? So you get to the atom, you get to the protons, neutrons, then you go further and you get to quarks, and I was just like, what is this? This plethora of crazy particles. When you look smaller and smaller, it seems to be almost like a fractal, and you just keep getting more and more intricate structure that we're really starting to kind of understand now, and have over the past 100 years developed ways to research this. And this sparked a curiosity that is still the same as it was that day, really. Another thing that kind of got me into physics was I got lent a book on special relativity by my physics teacher. So the maths was a little bit beyond my level at the time, but it was, you know, just about get the idea of what was happening. But learning about time dilation and space contraction, it's completely bonkers. I was just like, what? This is actually, you know, tried and tested science. I find that really exciting that, you know, things aren't necessarily exactly what they seem like in day-to-day life. And we're still finding things like that now. Another thing, my sister bought me a book on entanglement. So this is what Einstein called spooky action at a distance. Again, this totally blew my mind, the fact that you can have two particles. So the experiment that they did, the aspects experiment, send two photons in opposite directions for, I think at the time it was like 11 kilometers or something, and 7 or 8 miles or something. And then basically measure the spins of the two photons, and they're correlated instantaneously, right? As soon as you measure the spin of one, you know the spin of the other is the opposite. And the fact that this kind of questions our whole intuitive concept of locality, that was another big factor that kind of propelled me to study physics further. So I ended up choosing to do physics at university to see how far I could pursue this curiosity. And this is me at 16. If you'd told me back then that I'd end up being nominated for project manager of one of the subsystems on CMS and giving physics careers talks, I would have said you were completely mad. I just, you know, didn't have that in mind at all at that time. I was just interested in physics and wanted to see where it would go if I studied it. And I think this is an example of how life can sometimes take you to places you wouldn't necessarily have thought. And I think curiosity, determination, and a genuine passion for what you study can take you quite far. And a sense of humour and a bit of luck can hopefully take you the rest of the way. I've never been particularly confident. I think that's improved with time, but mainly just perseverant. And I think, again, that's something to really think about. If you're really interested in what you do, then that's the main thing, really. So university. So I went to Manchester for 4 years for a master's. Very much a case of working hard, but playing hard as well. And it's important to find the correct balance between this, right? And it can be challenging at times, but this is kind of, I think, the best way to approach it, because you want to enjoy yourself, but you also want to make sure that you succeed in your studies. So university is super exciting, but can be quite overwhelming. So seek support if you do need it. There's absolutely no shame or harm in looking for help if things get a bit too much sometimes. I find it very important to keep in touch with my friends and family at home, and still do keep in contact with my friends from school. Obviously, try not to get too carried away with extracurricular activities in your first year. This can be difficult. But even though the first year is the easiest, it's important to start strong and get the highest grade you can in your first year, as it obviously gets harder, and then your grades tend to get a bit lower towards the later years. As you know, in physics in particular, when things start to get a bit more complicated and you start looking at quantum field theory and stuff like that. And there's quite a high dropout rate in the first year. I think when I was at uni, it was around 20–25%. I haven't checked exactly what it is now, but I can imagine it's probably at a similar level. Important thing is to get into a good, healthy routine as much as possible, but within reason, because this sets the stage for the rest of your time at university. And to be honest, I found I actually had more fun in my later years at uni, once I kind of built up a bit of a foundation and then could go from there. Okay, in terms of PhD, I went to Liverpool. This was 4 years. Definitely the most challenging part of my career. Often the PhDs don't turn out exactly how you expect them to. You'll basically, if you want to do a PhD, you'll go to different universities and apply and talk to different groups and the leaders of the groups and potential supervisors. And at least when I went, it was kind of a sense of, oh, I've got this project and that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. That wasn't what happened, and I struggled with that because there was a very specific thing I wanted to do, which is to work on hardware for the LHC experiments. And I didn't get to do that, partly because we were starting to take data at the time, and obviously I needed all hands on deck for data analysis to look for supersymmetry, which I'll talk about later, and the Higgs boson. But basically, if you get to a stage, then the most important thing to do, make sure you understand the project that you're applying for, and this is guaranteed with your supervisors in the department, and also that you get on well with your supervisor, because nearly all the people that I know that struggled the most with their PhDs or didn't finish them, it was a lot to do with the dynamic with their supervisor. So that's really something to keep in mind. Perseverance is the key, and stick at it if you can. Even if you don't want to necessarily continue in the field, it could be a means to the end, and it's worth finishing, but not at the expense of happiness. So if it's not for you and you're in a hard situation and not having fun, don't be afraid to quit. There's other things you can do and other opportunities. So in your PhD, this would be where you'd really have to start thinking independently, and this goes for, you know, when you move into work after a university degree, this applies equally well there. And it's really rewarding to make original contributions to scientific knowledge. I think this, you know, in any form of work is kind of where you really start to get the opportunity to do things the way you want to and contribute in an original way. One thing to keep in mind is often the thought of doing something is a lot more stressful than just doing it. And this pie chart on the right just about sums it up in terms of thesis writing. This goes for any large project, especially ones that you're approaching individually, like a thesis. So once I'd actually started my thesis, it wasn't that bad. So when doing large pieces of work, I think it's generally good to get the easy bits done first, because then your sense of achievement helps encourage you to do the harder bits that take more time. Being organised and having good bookkeeping and good records of what you've done and your method and all that is really important. It will save you a lot of time later trying to organise and remember things. And this goes for digital content as well. Trying to keep that all catalogued in a methodical way is really important and saves a lot of time and helps you kind of describe what you've done a lot more easily and quickly when you come to writing reports. Okay, so moving on to postdoctoral research. So I've done 2 postdocs, one at Imperial College London for 7 years, and now I'm at Bristol. I've been here for 4 years, and I've moved around quite a bit. So I've been to 4 different universities. This is generally favoured in academia, and I think probably in the private sector a bit as well, within reason, because you meet a wider diversity of people, you get experience with different groups and different with different jobs, doing different things, learn how different departments work, and more likely to find people that you really connect with. And I think this is one of the most important things, is that you enjoy working with your colleagues, because you end up spending a lot of time with them, right? So you want to enjoy spending time with them. And finding a group of similar-minded people, I think, generally will more likely lead to success, because you enjoy yourself more, you have less stress, you share the challenge more equally, and more importantly, you know, you end up happier, I think. So I think this is really important. One thing I want to mention is something that is affecting me quite a lot over the course of my career, is imposter syndrome. You may not have heard of this, but this is just the first line of Wikipedia. So imposter syndrome, psychological experience of intellectual and professional infraudulence. It's a subjective experience of perceived self-doubt in one's abilities and accomplishments compared with others, despite evidence to suggest the contrary. So basically, it's where you think that you're not good enough for something when you are. This affected me from university until very recently, 6 months ago, I think, was when I really shook it off. And it went through phases. Obviously, it wasn't constant, but there was times, most of the time it was quite hum, sometimes it was really quite loud, raw, and has caused me some anxiety, quite a fair amount of anxiety at the worst times, but it's been manageable. But I hope no one will experience this, but you know, it's something to keep in mind and be mindful of. And I think you need to remember that you've got to where you are because you're good at what you do. Other people trust in you and believe in you to be successful, otherwise they wouldn't have employed you, or you wouldn't be on the degree you're on, or the PhD, or have the job. So you should believe in yourself as well, since other people believe in you. And at any point, regardless of where you are in terms of your mental approach to things, you've always got the capacity to realise your abilities to their full extent. So don't ever forget that. And I just want to send a shout out to my boss. He's the most inspirational person to me in my professional career. He's from Bridgend, previous project manager of the CMS 11 Trigger, which is a project that I work on, and he's now up in management in CMS and gene experiments. So thanks to him, he's helped me a lot along the way in terms of my career and when my postdoc started, and helped kind of show me how to approach things in a very good way. So thanks to him. So now for some science. So questions to think about for a second. When did the idea of particle physics begin? Obviously not particle physics because it's there the whole time, but when do you think the first mention that's been documented of the atom was? I'm not sure whether anyone can speak, but just have a little think about that, because the answer might not be quite what you think it is.
Could always put something in the chat if you do have an idea.
All right, so I've seen quite a lot of people say the Greeks. Obviously, that was kind of the birth of Western philosophy and investigation into knowledge in ways that might not have necessarily been approached before. But after a bit of research, and this is the first page of my thesis, it took me ages. It took me a whole day to get Sanskrit into my thesis. That was an unusual use of a day, but worth it. So the notion of a fundamental and indivisible unit of matter can be dated back to 6th century BC. So this is in the Bhagavad Gita, an ancient Hindu scripture, that is quoted by J. Robert Oppenheimer. You may have seen the film and known about him. One mediates on the omniscient, primordial, the controller, smaller than the atom, yet the maintainer of everything, whose form is inconceivable, resplendent like the sun, and totally transcendental to material nature. So even, 600 years before Christ, there were people thinking about this idea of an indivisible unit of matter, which everything is built from. And later the Greeks went on to expand on that, and then their philosophy of it continued until later on towards where we started actually doing experiments. So I'll go on to those. So in 1897, J.J. Thomson discovered the electron. So he did this by having two plates, cathode and anode, applying a high voltage, and then basically made a beam of electrons and deflected them using magnets. In doing this, he could measure the charge to mass ratio, and then found out that the mass of the particles in the beam was very small, much smaller than the atom. And also that if he changed the materials in the plates, the experiment didn't change. There was a common particle that was part of all atoms that had a very low mass and a charge of -1. So then he went on to formulate the plum pudding model of the atom. So this was basically the idea that you have negatively charged electrons in a kind of soup of positive charge, just in the top right. But then Rutherford came along and did the gold foil experiment that showed that the atom was mostly empty space with a very small, dense, positively charged nucleus. Probably know all about this already, but it's kind of an introduction into the beginning of experimental particle physics. So based on these results, Rutherford proposed a nuclear model of the atom. So this is the top right picture here. So you've got the electrons going around the proton or the nucleus. So this has a serious problem in that classical mechanics predicts that the electrons that are going around the nucleus will emit radiation because they're accelerating around, right? So they'll emit photons and lose energy and spiral into the nucleus in 16 picoseconds, right? So this is saying that the atom's unstable, which it isn't, we know that. So Bohr postulated that the electron is able to revolve in certain stable orbits around the nucleus. This is the bottom right here. I'm sure you've learned about this. Without radiating any energy. So it's contrary to what Maxwell's electromagnetism says. And then this, along with Einstein's discovery of the photoelectric effect and Planck's formulation of black body radiation, these were the first origins of quantum mechanics, basically saying that things don't behave classically, as Maxwell had said in his formulation of electromagnetism. So moving on a little bit, because obviously I'm coming to time. So going on to describe the four fundamental forces so far. We've got electromagnetism. So Maxwell found that electricity and magnetism are part of the same fundamental force. We have the weak nuclear force. This is responsible for radioactivity, and weaken the strong nuclear force, thankfully, otherwise the sun would have burnt up a long time ago. The strong nuclear force, so I've copied the bullet point there. So strong nuclear force, you can see on the right hand side, this is where you have gluons that are being exchanged between the protons and neutrons and the quarks in the nucleus. And this holds the nucleus together against the positive repulsion, electromagnetic repulsion of the protons. And then gravity, which is obviously the force we experience most in everyday life and explained by Einstein's general theory of relativity. So just to give a timeline of the standard model, don't worry about too many things on this, but as I haven't got much time, I just wanted to give an overview of how things developed over the past 100 or so years. So in 1919, proton discovered by Rutherford. In 1932, neutron discovered by James Chadwick. Moving on a bit, we have the introduction of the quarks. So initially just up, down, and strange, and then charm was following, and then with the idea of the leptons families. And then we had electroweak theory, which is a combination of the electromagnetism and weak nuclear force proposed, and then the Z and the Higgs bosons were predicted. Then in 1968, we had the first experimental evidence for quarks in electron-proton scattering experiments. So this is where we're starting to probe into the structure of the neutrons and protons in the nucleus. Then in 1970, the importance of forced charm quarks understood as it allows flavor changing weak interactions. 73, experimental evidence of Z boson. But in 74, this is all starting to be put together into a model which is trying to explain all of the things that we're seeing now. And this is still to this day the best model that we have, but there are holes in it, which I'll start to talk about later. 76, discovery of the tau leptons. This is the heavy partner of the electron. And this is the first particle of the third generation that was found. 77, discovery of the bottom quark, which is the third generation of quarks. 78, observation of the Z, mediated weak interaction. 79, strong evidence of gluons, which are the force carrying particles of the strong nuclear force that holds nucleus together. 83, W and Z bosons observed. 89, evidence that there's only 3 generations of quarks and leptons. 1995, discovery of the top quark, and then most recent discovery of the Higgs boson in 2012, which kind of completes the picture, which was nice in a way because it basically says, oh, look, this all fits together really nicely. And at the same time, it's a bit like, oh, well, where do we look now? How do we try and understand the other things that aren't explained by the standard model? All right, so what is the standard model? So this diagram on the right, I think, sums it up pretty nicely. And there's another diagram on the next page which explains it in a slightly different way, depicts it in a different way. So the standard model is a unified description of how all of the known fundamental particles, so it's matter, interact via 3 of the 4 known fundamental forces. And obviously we're at the subatomic level now, so we don't care about gravity because everything's, you know, very low mass. We'll talk a bit about that later. So matter consists of quarks and leptons. These are spin half fermions. The 3 generations with the same electromagnetic and strong interactions, and they vary within and across the generations by flavor and mass. So these are in the top. We've got up, down, charm, strange, top and bottom. So in this diagram, they're going outside to central, they're increasing in mass, and the top being the heaviest. And then the forces are mediated by the gauge bosons. These are spin 1 bosons. So for the electromagnetic force, the force is carried by the photon. For the strong nuclear force, the force is carried by the gluon. And for the electroweak force, it's carried by the W plus minus and Z0 bosons. So these are in yellow in the middle ring here. And then something that was, you know, in the 70s when it was proposed for the Higgs boson, it wasn't explained how the W plus minus and Z0 bosons get their mass, because, well, and the other particles as well. All the particles of the standard model were massless, and then the whole concept of the Higgs mechanism was introduced, and this is basically how other particles gain their mass, by the interactions with this scalar field. So this is the most successful and precise scientific model ever. So it correctly predicts the electron magnetic moment to 13 digits. So what's that? 10,000 billion? 1 in 10,000 billion. What's that? I guess a trillion, 10 trillion. So looking at a slightly different depiction of the standard model, this gives more details on the masses and a little bit more of a clear idea of how the different bosons and the different matter particles interact. So it shows here the quarks with the gluon and shown that they interact via the strong force, and then you go out to a wider circle to include the electron and muon and tau and the photon, and they all interact via the electromagnetic force. And then you go out again, you include the neutrinos and the W and Z bosons, and then they all interact with the weak nuclear force. And then it shows also a bit more clearly the first, second and third generations of quarks and leptons. So I've put a little emoji here on the right because the graviton isn't part of this model, and this is outside of the standard model. So I'll talk a bit about that later. Here's quite a fun game. You can look at this in your own time if you want, just a kind of flow chart to find out which particle you are by different properties. Okay, so this all looks kind of quite neat and complete almost, right? So why do we need to continue doing particle physics? Because it looks like, okay, everything fits together nicely. We can explain this property of the electron to 1 in 10 trillion. What else? Why do we need to do anything more? Well, there's quite a few things that don't fit into this model. So the standard model predicts massless neutrinos. So how do neutrinos acquire mass? There's some process there that isn't part of the standard model. We know neutrinos must have non-zero mass since this is required for neutrino oscillations, and I'll talk a bit about the solar neutrino problem in a second. Another big problem is the matter-antimatter symmetry is not yet explained, so how the universe that we observe is basically just formed of baryons or standard matter rather than antimatter. There's significant evidence for dark matter. So what particles constitute dark matter that we observe in the universe? So this is the matter that holds galaxies together against a rotation that's faster than it would be if it's just the matter that we observe via electromagnetic radiation. There's a gauge hierarchy problem. So this is simply just the question of why gravity is so weak, basically. Gravity is 10 to the 24 times weaker than electroweak force, and this just doesn't make any sense, doesn't seem natural. And grand unification, do the electroweak and strong forces unite at some higher energy scale? So there's all these questions and a few more that are reasons why we need to look at more detail into nature and how it behaves to try and understand better. So how do neutrinos acquire mass? So this was initially, the question was initially asked because basically you get a load of neutrinos from nuclear fission in the sun, right? But we only detect a third of the neutrinos that we would expect from understanding of the nuclear properties of the sun. So why is that? And it turns out that actually there's these three types of, we know there's three types of neutrinos, the electron, muon, and tau neutrinos. And it turns out because there's different eigenstates called, there's mass and flavor eigenstates, that this allows for oscillations between the different states of neutrinos, so different types of neutrinos. So Super Kamiokande measured neutrinos from cosmic showers and detected fewer muon neutrinos coming up through the Earth and come down from above. So this implies that those traveling through the Earth with a longer flight path had time to oscillate into tau neutrinos. This is the first detection of neutrino oscillations. And the thing about neutrino oscillations is it requires them to have mass. It requires them to have mass eigenstates as well as flavor eigenstates. These are the eigenstates of the solutions to the quantum field theory, basically. So I also do some work on the deep underground neutrino experiment that's currently being constructed. So this is really trying to look into the properties of neutrino oscillations, the order of the mass states, and search for extra neutrino flavors to see what's going on there. And this is really promising. The neutrino sector is really an area where we could find new physics. Okay, so another problem, why is there more matter than antimatter? So it assumed in the early universe that equal amounts of matter and antimatter existed. Yet we know that the universe is mostly matter, because if there were still regions of antimatter, then we would see electromagnetic radiation from the annihilation of the matter and antimatter. You just get loads of photons and we measure their energy and be like, okay, there's both matter and antimatter, but we don't see that. And standard model doesn't explain this, right? So new experiments like June will help us understand this further, hopefully. Okay, so I'm assuming you've heard of dark matter. What is it? There's a lot of evidence for an unknown form of matter that doesn't interact with light, with the electromagnetic field. So the main one is the galaxy rotation curves. So the luminous matter density decreases moving out from the center of the spiral galaxies, which would require rotation velocities to also decrease. Because obviously if you've just got gravity holding together the luminous matter, then you expect the rotation to get slower as you go out, otherwise they would fly apart, right? But this isn't true. So if you look at the plot in the top right, the expected is the blue curve, what you'd expect from normal matter. And what we observe actually is the orbital velocity as you go out to the higher radius of the galaxy is much higher. So it seems like there's some extra mass there that's holding the galaxy together against its rotation, a higher rotation velocity. So another evidence for dark matter is gravitational lensing. So this is a lot stronger than we'd be expected from just luminous matter. And on the picture on the bottom right here, this is quite recent. This is really interesting. This is the bullet cluster. So basically, you had two clusters of stars colliding, one from the left and one from the top right. And then they collided, and then the gas is obviously quite kind of dispersed. The gas then kind of stayed in the middle. but the dark matter halo carried on because it had more momentum, it's more dense. And we see this because, so we observe the normal luminous matter in the red in the center. And then if we analyze the galaxies in the blue regions, we actually see much stronger gravitational lensing in the outer regions. So this is basically saying that it's much higher mass in those two blue regions than there is in the center, but we don't see any luminous matter there. So this is really strong evidence for dark matter. And there's a number of complementary approaches to search for dark matter. So one assumption that we have to make if we're going to look for dark matter is that dark matter couples to standard model particles, because if it doesn't, how are we supposed to observe it? How are we supposed to measure any interaction with dark matter? There's a few different ways of looking at this. We can look at indirect detection, we can do collider searches, or we can do direct detection, and I'll talk a bit more about this later. Okay, so another one of the big problems in our current understanding of fundamental physics is that gravity is so much weaker than other fundamental forces, 10 to 24 times weaker than the weak nuclear force. And it just is a problem of naturalness. Why is there such a big difference? And this is, to phrase it another way, it's why is the Planck scale so much smaller than the electroweak scale? So supersymmetry offers a potential solution to this by introducing a symmetry between bosons and fermions. So in the right-hand diagram here, you can see the diagram that I had a few slides ago, but with these extra particles on the outside. So every standard model boson, force-carrying particles, has a supersymmetry fermion that matter particles, and vice versa. So there's other ways to try and solve this problem of why gravity is so weak. So one of them is extra dimensions, and this posits that gravity is actually at a similar strength to the fundamental forces, but it appears weaker due to flux through additional dimensions. And this is what really kind of kept me pursuing particle physics, I think, is this idea that I think it would be fascinating if we could scientifically prove that extra dimensions exist. Okay, so that's kind of a lot of theory stuff. And our motivation for why we want to do experiments that we're doing. So the next section I'll go through hydrogen physics of the LHC. So how do we look for beyond the standard model of physics? So one way is doing precision measurements of the standard model. So to see if we see any deviations from the expected values that the model predicts, then this can point in the direction of where we might see new physics. And one example of this is looking at asymmetries between beam meson decays. So in standard model, these should basically be the same, but if we see a difference in the rate of B0 decays to muons versus the strange B meson into muons, then that's pointing that there's some other process there that standard model doesn't predict or describe. We can also do direct searches for new physics. So beyond the standard model physics models predict new particle resonances, so just new particles like supersymmetric particles. We can look for the SUSY particles decaying into standard model particles in the detector. We can look for long-lived particles. This is something we started to look at more recently, decaying into the detector, and there's a diagram on the right-hand side here. So the experiments at the LHC, the general purpose ones, CMS and Atlas, are built around full 4-pi coverage of the interaction point. But with these are kind of based around the idea that the particles originate from the actual collision point, the collision vertex, the primary vertex. In this diagram, the beam's going into and out of the page. So this is like a slice of the detector. And then the particles are obviously going out into the detector, but we can look at kind of delayed long-lived particles that travel out some way into the detector and then decay into jets or muons in the detector. We can also look for missing energy in the detector. So this is something I work on a lot, and I'll talk about more later. But the idea of missing energy is that when the protons collide at the LHC, if you add up all of the transverse momentums of all the particles that are produced, because the protons are collided with zero transverse momentum, if there is then a non-zero transverse momentum, you know that there's been a particle that hasn't been detected, where we haven't measured the energy, go in the opposite direction of that vector. So like a neutrino, for example, that leaves missing transverse energy in the detector. But you can also have dark matter particles that could leave missing energy in the detector that we can measure. Okay, so just to give an overview of the LHC. So the LHC collides bunches of bunches of 100 billion protons at 14 tera electron volts. So compared to the size of the electron, which is half a kilo electron volt, at 40 million times a second. So basically you have these radio frequency cavities that accelerate the protons up to very close to the speed of light. So to think about this a bit more easily, it's around 11,000 times a second. There's 1,200 superconducting dipoles that at 2 Kelvin, so minus 271 Celsius, that bend the beams round. And there's a bend radius of 2.8 kilometers and really strong 8 Tesla magnetic field to bend the proton beams. And then there's around 400 of these quadrupoles to focus the proton beam to collide at 4 different interaction points. So we have CMS at the top, which is the experiment that I work on, and then ALICE, which looks at heavy ion collisions, ATLAS, which is another general purpose experiment, and then LHCb, which is a forward detector. So it's very precise in its measurement of B quarks, and it's an asymmetric detector, so it measures everything in one direction rather than having 4 pi full coverage. And this is really exciting because there's a collaboration of over 100 nations, lots of people, different places and different backgrounds and cultures. Okay, so I should probably start moving on a bit more quickly so we have time for questions. So pileup, this is basically where because we're colliding bunches of hundreds of billions of protons, you have lots of, the ideal event, you have a hard scatter, which is where there's really high momentum transfer between 2 protons and the quarks and gluons inside the protons. And that could create a Higgs boson or some dark matter particle that we can try and measure. But there's also lots of low energy proton collisions as well that are imposed on top of this. And we have around 55 to 2018, we're about 65 now. But for the upgrade, we'll have 200 pileup in 2029. So this is the bottom diagram. This is a lot more complicated. So looking at the CMS detector, basically we have at the center, we have these pixel and silicon strip detectors that very accurately measure the tracks of the particles. Moving out from there, we have the electromagnetic calorimeter. It's made from these lead tungstate crystals, of which there wasn't like much of this material around until we made this detector. And it's basically as transparent as glass, but much more dense. So the photons interact and the electrons interact with it and shower. So we measure the energies of the electrons and photons in the ecal. Moving out again, we have the HCal, hadron calorimeter. So this is plastic scintillator interspersed with bronze plates or brass plates. This basically measures the energies of hadrons, so pions, kaons, neutrons, protons, various types of or kaons, different types of hadrons. And then going out again, we have the muon detectors, which measure the tracks of muons. And CMS measures muons very accurately, and we've got this very large solenoid, so very high magnetic field, 4 Tesla, interspersed with the muon detectors. So magnet bends the charged particle tracks, and this is how we measure the momentum of the charged particles. And then we can reconstruct the tracks to measure different properties. So this is shown in a bit more detail. So basically, you can have a photon at the top left, goes through the tracker but doesn't bend, and it doesn't leave a track. So basically, because it's not charged, so only charged particles leave tracks in the silicon tracker. So the photon goes straight through to the ecal and then showers in and measure the energy of the photon. For neutral hadrons, they are also not charged, so don't leave a track and don't bend in the tracker, and then just shower, and the energy is reconstructed in the HCal. For muons, they're charged, so they bend the path, and they're minimum ionizing particles, so travel all the way through the detector and then get to the muon detectors right on the outside, and then we measure the momentum using the tracks in the muon detectors and in the tracker. You have a charged hadron that will pass through the tracker and leave the tracks as charged, and then shower in the hadron calorimeter. And then an electron, which will leave tracks in the tracker and then shower in the ecal. So this is a different ways we measure different types of particles that are produced from the proton collisions. So given an event display, so this is the Higgs boson event decaying into 2 muons. So there's 2 jets, which are the orange cones that are produced from how the Higgs boson's generated from the proton collisions, and then the Higgs itself decays into the 2 red muons. So jets and MET. So many beyond standard model signatures produce jets and or missing transverse energy that's reconstructed in the detector. Jets are produced by the hadronization of gluons and light quarks. So on the right hand side, you can see that you get these jets of particles, then energy is deposited in the calorimeters. So jets are one of the main ways that we'll look for beyond standard model physics. And then, as I said, invisible particles leave momentum imbalance in the transverse plane, and this is the bottom diagrams here. So you add up all the vectors of the particles that you measure, and then if you end up with it pointing in a certain direction, then you know that the negative of that vector is where some invisible particle went. So yeah, these are the two main handles we have on trying to look for beyond standard model physics in the experiments at the LHC. So one of the things we do at Bristol is look for Higgs to invisible. So this is where the Higgs decays into invisible particles. This could be dark matter. So this is shown if you add up the different vectors of the particles. So everything in this diagram apart from the black and white dotted line, then you basically get a vector, and then this is represented by that line. And in this event, you've got quite a lot of missing transverse energy. So this could be something quite interesting. I won't go into this, but this is more details on the different processes that can produce the Higgs boson, and then different decay channels for invisible particles from the Higgs boson. So this is looking a bit more into the theory of how we can look for dark matter via Higgs to invisible processes. So what I work on is the CMS trigger. So basically, you'll collide in these 100 billion protons at a rate of 40 megahertz, right? And if you read out the 100 million channels of the detector, you end up with petabytes of data, right? And we haven't got the bandwidth for the data acquisition to save all this data to disk. So what we have to do is quickly reconstruct the full event in custom hardware using field programmable gate arrays, which is customizable logic that runs very quickly on these boards. Quickly look at see whether the event looks interesting, and then we trigger on the event if it is interesting. So in the hardware trigger that I work on, level 1 trigger, we reduce the event rate from 40 megahertz to 100 kilohertz. That should be, 40 megahertz to 100 kilohertz in level 1 hardware trigger in 3 microseconds, and then 100 kilohertz to 100 hertz in the software high level trigger. So overall 40 megahertz to 100 hertz, and then you're recording only the interesting events, because it's only, these processes are so rare, like a Higgs production, it's like 1 in 100 billion or something like that. So we really need to reduce the amount of data that we're recording to disk to only keep the interesting events. So this is a picture of the subsystem that I helped commission back in 2015. These is custom FPGA processor boards. You have a terabyte input-output optical links. So yeah, this is still running right now. We're taking data as we speak. So I work quite a lot on the JET algorithm. So this sums up the energies of the trigger towers and the detector. I won't go into too many details about this, but this is one of the algorithms that runs in those boards to reconstruct the jets. And then the MET also, we take the vector sum of all the energies of the trigger towers in the event and reconstruct the missing transverse energy in the level 1 trigger as well. And it's just a case study of something that happened recently where we had to apply a new algorithm to try and suppress the effect of the pile-up interactions, basically subtracting noise from the missing transverse energy calculation. Okay, so outside the LHC, there's lots of interesting experiments, June being one of them, so the deep underground neutrino experiment. So here protons are accelerated at a graphite target on the bottom right, and then positive pions are separated and decay into muon and neutrino. So you end up with a muon neutrino beam that's going through 800 miles of rock underground. And you have the far detector on the left, and this is measuring neutrino beam, and also can trigger from neutrinos on supernova. So it's a really exciting experiment I've started to spend a bit of time on. And there's, hopefully a good chance that we could try and understand a lot of things from this, and maybe get an idea of where we can look for new physics. So for dark matter candidates, there's different ways of searching for these. So in this diagram on the bottom right, here you've got your dark matter candidates on the left, chi, and then quarks or standard model particles on the right. So there's 3 different ways of looking for dark matter. You can have indirect detection, which is where you get 2 dark matter particles that interact and then produce standard model particles that you measure. Or going down from top to bottom, you get direct detection, which is then basically a dark matter particle scattering off a standard model particle, and you measure the change in the energy momentum of the standard model particle. And then collider search is where you're just colliding standard model particles, then producing hopefully dark matter particles. So 3 different ways. The particle candidates can be weakly interacting massive particles, or axions, which is a new boson that fixes the problem with a strong force, or massive compact halo objects, but it's unlikely that it's these due to various things that we see with cosmic microwave background radiation and galaxy structure, which requires that we have a large fraction of non-baryonic matter. So in the top right, you can see these different experiments. And here's just an idea of the different energies of the different experiments. Here's one of the experiments that's being upgraded at the moment, I think. So this is xenon 1T, so it's 1 ton of liquid xenon. And if you see on the right-hand side, basically, you can have a weakly interactive massive particle that comes into the tank of liquid xenon. It's underground. And then it will basically interact with the standard model particle, and then we'll measure this in the photomultiplier tubes at the top from the signal that's produced by the electrons that are ionized. So there's already started to be some evidence, or it kind of signals of something happening. So this is quite exciting. Okay, another way that we could try and explain the hierarchy problem is the large extra dimensions. So this is something I think could be really interesting. So adding large extra dimensions to quantum field theory can solve the hierarchy problem of why gravity is so much weaker than other forces. And then we have these different processes of how standard model particles at quarks and gluons can scatter or interact with the graviton. So it's graviton production now. And there's 2 detector signatures that we can measure here. So monojet, so you get a single high PT jet and a large transverse emission energy from where the gluon passes through the detector undetected, doesn't leave any tracks or energy. Or monophoton, where you get a single high PT photon and also large transverse emission energy. And here we have the jet or the photon back to back with a Met vector. So there's topological ways we can look at the particles that are produced and how we measure the detector to try and reconstruct the event and try and see exactly what happened in that collision event. And we can also have initial final state radiation, so we have additional jets that are produced as well. So we have backgrounds. So obviously when you're measuring these signal processes, you have backgrounds, so other processes that could look and fake these events and look like them. So this would be Z to neutrinos or W to lepton neutrinos plus jets. So you have to find ways of subtracting those backgrounds from your data to try and measure your signal in data. And we do that using simulated data that's based on the theory. Okay, so I've gone a little bit over time, but basically, as a summary, there's a whole spectrum of physics beyond the standard model that's hopefully within our reach. There's many other experiments other than the LHC that are searching for new physics. So hopefully somewhere we'll start to see some strong signs of new physics. We'll start to answer some of these questions. And we're just at the beginning of our understanding of our universe and the wonderfully diverse phenomena that inhabit it. So it's a really exciting time for physics, and think about joining the search for new physics. So just some general advice to end the talk. It's not always about academic ability. I wouldn't consider myself to be a great physicist by any stretch of imagination, but I know enough to contribute where I can. An ability to communicate effectively and work well with people is equally as important as, say, it's being clever. There are many different forms of intelligence. This is something to keep in mind. So make sure you know your worth in the wider scheme of things and in the workplace, and also during the studies. And it's not just about having in-depth knowledge or technical skill. Try and keep an open mind and an open heart. Everyone's got their own life and different things going on, and especially in collaborations, this is important to keep in mind. But also don't be afraid to stand your ground and stick up for yourself if you feel like you've been disrespected. So make sure you respect yourself and others respect you, because this is a minimum that you should expect from any job or workplace. And finally, be yourself. It's important to respect your own individuality and the individuality of others. You don't always need to try and fit in, and diversity should always be celebrated and encouraged. So that's my last remark, I think. And that's the end of the talk.